Hey everyone, good morning. Welcome to the Untangle Health Show. I'm really excited to be talking to you all today. Our Untangling Healthcare for Multi-Industry Companies show that we have here. My name is Tim Barnes. I'm the Director of Partnerships. I am joined by Chris Notaro, our CEO. Chris, I'd love for you to say hello. We have some new faces on the call as well. So if you want to just give a quick background before we dive into it of who we are at Untangle Health, that would be great.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Tim. Really excited to be back doing this with you. I'm Chris Notaro. As Tim said, I'm the head of the team here at Untangle Health. We are a growth advisory firm working with software businesses operating in the healthcare industry. That includes many healthcare specific software companies and major players within the healthcare industry, but that also includes global, horizontal, multi industry companies either entering or pursuing deeper market share in the healthcare industry as a growth vertical. And so that's what today's show is all about, is talking about our multi-industry companies and clients and how we see the dynamics of globally multinational, multi-industry corporations doing business in the healthcare industry.
Great. Thanks for that overview, Chris. And so, our last show, we talked about how to thrive in 2025. We talked about big topics like AI, cybersecurity, interoperability, and really part of that innovation that we talked about for so long is why it's so exciting for companies to be looking at and thinking about how they can enter the healthcare market. I'll ask you, one question. We've got Vive, we've got HIMSS coming up. Coming back to the topic of last time, how is 2025 looking? How are you feeling? How's it been now that we're almost midway through February?
I can't believe we're almost already halfway through the first quarter of the year. Time is absolutely flying. As Tim mentioned, we're getting into conference season here with Vive, the first major healthcare conference of the year next week. And then 2 weeks after that, we have HIMSS, which is probably the largest healthcare technology conference across the domain. So time is flying, things are moving fast. And I think you look out across the industry, not just within healthcare, but the technology industry broader overall. And everyone has AI fever. We're seeing technology, again, across industries evolve at a rapid pace. But what's interesting is to talk about the dynamics in the healthcare industry of what has usually forced healthcare to lag behind the technology innovations of other industries like the financial services sector, like e-commerce, like media, that had typically been way out further ahead of healthcare. And I would say the current time is no different. But that said, that's the reason that we're here, is to talk about multi-industry companies pursuing the healthcare vertical. And why does healthcare light up for all of them? It's because of the absolutely massive total addressable market, and that any sort of corporate development analysis you do of potential growth verticals, health for technology companies and software businesses, healthcare is almost always going to gravitate towards the top of that. And the major theme of rapid advancement across the technology landscape, across industries, I think is one of the biggest things that stands out about the new year so far to me, Tim.
Yeah, that's great. And that's right along the lines of really that first question that I wanted to ask to center us
I
is
jumped the gun on you.
you did. You did, you jumped, you got excited, but I set you up, right? I think it's the truth is we talked about all of that innovation that's happening within this space. We're going to get to Vive, we're going to get to HIMSS, you're going to see that. But really, let's ask that core question that you started talking about is why are these companies going to be coming and walking the floor of HIMSS and deciding, especially thinking about they may have some healthcare book of business, they may have some traction there, but why should they start looking to verticalize, and why should they be excited to see how they can really grow and expand within that space is that first question.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more in a later question about what are the types of companies and the types of specialty areas of certain horizontal companies that where maybe healthcare is the most appealing. But I think I already answered the question and have to go back there to start by saying anytime you do the corporate development, the basic math, when you start looking at and evaluating growth verticals, from just a pure money flow and TAM perspective, healthcare is always going to be at the top of that. Add in the fact that healthcare is relatively inelastic. The demand's never going away. People are always going to need healthcare. Yes, we will see certain cyclical trends with the economy and certain microeconomic trends based on the economy, but generally speaking, the demand for healthcare is only going to pick up over time, especially as you can argue the quality of population health, not only in the country, but globally, isn't keeping up with the pace of information. So the demand is just always going to be there for healthcare.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, I think the third thing that jumps out to me and why healthcare jumps out as a growth vertical, especially for horizontal technology organizations, is because when you look at major technology-driven industries in the United States and globally, and you were to stack rank them, generally speaking, healthcare lags behind technology advancement as compared to some of the ones I mentioned earlier. So financial services, e-commerce, media, telecommunications, the list goes on. And healthcare is an opportunity to drive advancements that other industries maybe have seen adopted more en masse, and to make an impact a little bit more quickly in healthcare just because of kind of the state and where it's coming from.
Yeah, we talked about that a lot last time, is like the reason healthcare is very fast in the advancements in certain areas, and in other areas it has to be slow because of the sensitive nature of the work in healthcare. But we look at financial services and some of those others that are also highly regulated and say, how can we take a look at them and move as fast as they can at the pace that healthcare is? Like you said, very synergistic industries that are almost provide that roadmap for us. So when we talk about healthcare, so these companies that are horizontal, they really want to start looking at healthcare. Who are those key players? So who are the verticals, the sub verticals? Where do we start thinking about somebody that's newer to healthcare that they should be looking holistically at the market?
Yeah, if we start simple, I think we look at our major buyer types in healthcare. So the predominant ones that stand out from the top are going to be your provider organizations, your organizations providing actual care. You're going to have your payer organizations. Those are going to be your insurance companies. And then you have your pharmaceutical organizations. These are going to be obviously companies that are developing different drugs and therapeutics and bringing them to market. So those are going to be considered, I would say, your core traditional buyer types. And for each one of them, you definitely can, I would say, a wide array of sub verticals within them, right? So a couple of examples, right? So within healthcare providers, you've got acute sort of providers where you have hospitals and large health systems. You're going to have ambulatory providers, specialty providers. You're going to have public health institutions, et cetera, et cetera. Within the payer area, I think you could argue that there's a huge industry around self-funded employers and employer-based insurance. And there's some overlap there with payers, but that also could be uniquely described as its own buyer type. And then within pharmaceuticals, you obviously have drug and therapeutic development, like I already mentioned, but you also have a wide array of different sort of biotech subverticals. And then that also gets into medtech, medical devices. And then that starts to get into what you would call healthcare technology, HCIT, software and services around healthcare technology as its own unique buyer type, separate from those major big three I talked about, right? Healthcare technology could be its own major buyer type. It also could be seen as a channel into those major buyer types. And generally speaking, that's a big part of what we do whenever we work with somebody new, is helping to map the healthcare universe from their perspective of these core major buyer types that are uniform across the industry, no matter who's looking at it, but then also tailoring that health tech component, whether it's buyer types or whether it's channels or whether it's a mix of both.
Yeah, and I think part of our plan, Will, to talk a little to later is to talk about how we approach that, and the healthcare data value chain, something we talked about on the last show that we'll touch on today as well. And I think you mentioned it, is when you look at those verticals and sub verticals, is you have to approach them, and they are unique in their own way. There's unique buying cycles, they're unique personas, and the way that you navigate that. And I think that's just something, again, we have a short show today that we can't dive in completely on all of those, but it's part of the exciting work that we do, and we're very energized by. But you mentioned
And Tim, I want to jump in there because I think that's a really important point that's really consistent with our experience working with multi-industry companies entering healthcare or trying to expand their market share in healthcare, especially for those that are trying to expand their market share. I can't tell you how many multi-industry companies have come to us and said, hey, we have a smattering of clients of this buyer type or that buyer type, or a mix of the different buyer types. But when you go to their website, when you look through their existing sales materials and talk tracks, it's a relatively one-size-fits-all approach to the healthcare industry. Yep. And that's so important for multi-industry companies doing business in healthcare, is really making sure you're speaking to the right buyer types, because the ecosystems within the domains of those different buyer types can differ so much in their minds, even if a lot of the core dynamics are similar across. You have different ecosystem with different players in the different tech stacks depending on the different buyer types. And so it's really important to speak the buyer's language with the universe they're coming from and not treating all healthcare people the same, because that's a quick way to get a payer buyer to tune out if you're talking to them like a provider or vice versa.
Yeah, and I think you just mentioned, right, when we talk, we use the term payers, as people are familiar with, but the insurance companies, you mentioned whether you're talking to payers or who you're talking to, you need to understand how payers fit into this ecosystem. And I think that's a great place to start, is to understand, especially the US healthcare system. We have to understand how the payers fit, right? We have a piece we wrote, Payers Hold the Keys to the Healthcare Kingdom, talking and really describing the role within payers. So for a company that's looking to verticalize, what should they be thinking about in terms of the payers, and really what is the total impact of the payers across our system?
Yeah, and forgive me plugging the piece again, because I think if you haven't checked it out, you definitely should go find this Payers Hold the Keys piece out on our website just to learn a little bit more about that. But I think one of the things that jumps out to me is the, call it, consumer dynamics of the healthcare industry and how different that is than other industries, and the role that payers play in that incredibly different dynamic. So in most other consumer driven industries, you have a buyer and a seller, you have a service provider, and then a consumer or a customer of sorts. But in the healthcare industry, you have a very different, almost like triangle dynamic, right? You've got a provider organization providing the care services. You've got a human being, a patient, sort of receiving, being the consumer of those services, but they're not necessarily the buyer. In most cases, it's the healthcare insurance company that is the buyer and has their own sort of seller customer relationship with a provider organization. And then sometimes that relationship is reversed. And so it creates this incredibly interesting dynamic. But at the end of the day, you can almost think about large insurance companies or any type of insurance company as like healthcare's banks. Really, the money flow, if you follow the money flow in healthcare, it all either stems from or goes around the healthcare insurance companies. And so this is super important. Even if you're a multi-industry company that is verticalizing into healthcare, or you already have a decent amount of business in healthcare, and whether it's B2B and you're not targeting payers, or it's B2C and then you're really not targeting payers, it's still really important to understand the macro and micro economics of the role that the payers play in the money flow of the healthcare industry as a whole. And that's exactly what that piece is aiming to cover.
Yeah, and we talked, we showed that healthcare expenditure spend, right? We're talking trillions of dollars, right? We're talking, you mentioned that Tam Sam Sam at the start of what the healthcare industry is. So again, just another key piece, and not to plug that piece again, like you said, but really that really describes our approach and how we think about it. Real quick, I just think it's an interesting example, how payers buy, right? The cyclical cycle. We don't need to go heavy into that, but I think that's a good example too for people on the call to understand that healthcare have its unique buying cycles, and payers are no different, right?
Yeah, definitely. We talk a lot about that across our different client engagements, and the go-to-market and revenue acceleration type work we do is you have very predictable buying windows when it comes to doing business with payers that are going to open up usually in early summer. Those decision making is really going to ramp up in the fall. And then you're going to see those budgets released once the calendar year turns and implementations begin in January. Of course, a lot of businesses across industries, not just healthcare, stick pretty close to that budgetary fiscal cycle. It's you can set your watch by it when it comes to doing business with payers in the United States.
Yeah. And I just think, yeah, thanks for that quick example. I just think it's important and really good one to highlight for a multi-industry company. So transitioning, so last show, we talked a lot about those big players, the Epics, the EHR, we've talked about the payers, the providers. So I do want to touch on healthcare IT companies. So how do they fit into the overall space? And so companies that are either companies themselves or looking to go and approach healthcare IT companies. Talk a little bit about how we think about healthcare IT companies within this space.
So you have to look at, again, you're trying to whittle down who are your core buyer types, where are your market share opportunities within healthcare, and again, trying to think through, are we Are we looking at a provider dominant landscape? Are we looking at a payer dominant landscape? Or are we looking at a pharma dominant landscape? Or are we truly just, some horizontal companies are actually just targeting software companies as their buyers, right? And so therefore the provider or the payer or the pharma company are like the buyer's buyer, and their buyer is that health tech layer in the middle. In which case you could think of the health tech layer as almost more like a channel to open up their buyers. But where I'm going with this is you have to look at the core tech stack in the area of the market that you're playing with. And so if we're talking about providers, your EHR is over the last decade or two historically going to be the most outsized piece of that tech stack. But that said, as that market's evolved, one thing you'll hear us saying a lot is the EHR used to be the whole castle to a provider organization, and now it's just one stanchion of the castle, because you really need to be good at all these things. These is what we call the healthcare data value chain, which you can apply to any one of your major buyer types. That this has to do with getting data in and out, the interoperability of moving data around from within your ecosystem to players outside of your ecosystem and everything in between. We need to talk about the data quality and uplifting the quality of your data, because if you've got bad underlying data, it's going to cause you a world of problems downstream and upstream. How are you storing that data for max usability? What's your data source of truth? 10 years ago, especially in the provider landscape, the answer here was the EHR. And I think in some cases it still is. But the most sophisticated organizations across the landscape are moving their data storage source of truth outside of that kind of end user facing layer that the EHR is becoming. And then, of course, you've got your abilities to analyze data and deploy that data, which is where you're going to find all your AI, machine learning, analytics, things of that nature. And then wrapping it all up, you've got cybersecurity. So going back to the question that Tim asked, you want to be thinking about who are your core buyers and what does their ecosystem look like in this mix? Who are the major players? So again, provider, you're going to have EHR, you're going to have billing systems, you're going to have CRMs, and you're going to have major technology investments that these organizations have made and need to stitch all together as they're trying to modernize their infrastructure layer underneath it all. And on the payer side, you're going to have where instead of an EHR, you're going to have a claims adjudication system, and you're going to have a mix of all different billing and revenue cycle management systems to optimize claims and optimize performance and optimize efficiency, optimize plans and pricing, et cetera, et cetera. But still, that infrastructure layer, that data value chain that we just showed is going to be consistent in how they're making those major tech stack investments.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for that. And in terms of AI, because we need to bring it up, and you mentioned that early, any thoughts around AI companies and where they fit along that healthcare data value chain and how companies should be thinking about them?
Yeah, certainly. And Tim, we missed I think a topic that we had queued up for earlier in the show, which I want to jump back to because we glossed over it in some ways. Like, where are we seeing the most demand for multi-industry companies pursuing healthcare or investing more heavily in healthcare? And just to be really blunt, a couple of the ones that stick out to us and occupy more of the conversations that we're having with multi-industry companies. So cybersecurity, that's nothing new for us because we've been doing a lot of work there. But cybersecurity is one area of multi-industry focus that is picking up a lot of steam and interest in the healthcare sector. Call it financial technology, fintech, entering in healthcare. Really incredible market dynamics there coming from what they're used to in the financial services industry, and now looking at healthcare as a growth vertical. I would say more broadly, the kind of the data, the horizontal data and AI space is that next major entrant. Of course, we have the rise of healthcare specific AI companies. So some of the more recent leaders that come to mind for me are going to be like Hippocratic AI, Bridge, Ambient. Oh man, I'm hoping I'm not forgetting any of my friends that are going to ding me afterwards and say, hey, you didn't name me. In any case, you do have the healthcare specific AI companies, but also you just see like an explosion of horizontal technology companies with an emphasis on AI. And something I want to call out just from the last couple of days, Sam Altman, OpenAI CEO, most recent blog post which titled 3 Observations. really interesting to read the writings coming out from Sam Altman and others like him. But what stuck out to me from this 3 observations blog was he talked about, and I'm going to look over here to make sure I get the quote, that AI intelligence is going to scale with the log of resources. And by that, he means compute, data, and inference. And that really struck a chord with me because what he's talking about there is the healthcare data value chain. So AI intelligence is only going to be able to scale in healthcare as fast as that healthcare data value chain and that infrastructure layer is in place. And so really exciting to see the potential impact and the acceleration that healthcare organizations across the landscape are going to be able to leverage, but they're only going to be able to go so far and so fast as the quality of their compute and their data layers. And then, of course, inference being the quality of data and insight that you're feeding these models to up level the sophistication of the model is going to go hand in hand with the quality of data that you're sitting on and that you're innovating upon as well. So yeah, really interesting and really timely. I'll say Tim and I were already pretty far down the path of having schemed out our talking points for this program. And I saw this blog from Sam Altman and it was just like light bulb city of the way he describes AI intelligence scalability with compute, data, and inference.
Yeah, no, I think that's good because each time we talk, we write down more topics and things we want to go, and the time goes quick. So I think we definitely something we want to go deeper and further on. I do, as we move and we don't have a ton of time left. And good thing is this isn't the most exciting topic, but one of the things that's really important in a highly regulated industry like healthcare are compliance and regulations. And we know healthcare has a lot of them. Just so, Chris, if you want to again, not go super deep on this, but just some of the ones that people looking to verticalize in healthcare should be aware of and what are driving the market right now from a compliance and regulation side.
Yeah, I view this as a sales enablement topic for clients and partners that we work with that are multi-industry companies where we're engaging regularly with their reps and their sellers, having conversations in market and almost acting more of an industry principal for them and their deal teams and helping to move some of these opportunities along. You look at what are some of the things that I would recommend these folks just be at least conversational in or be aware of if and when topics related to them come up. I usually start with kind of the history lesson is if I say the words meaningful use and you don't know what that means, it's worth spending a couple minutes just perusing the history of the turn of the 2000s into the 2010s and the meaningful use era and the dynamics in the industry that they created by government incentive to modernize technology of the healthcare industry. That's an important history lesson just to see how some of the competitive dynamics in the industry have unfolded as a result of that major legislation. But in terms of today, what is impacting the industry, I usually tell people, make sure you're at least a little bit familiar with the Cures Act and how that's evolved over the last 5 or so years. Make sure you're aware of CMS compliance and regulations. There's some interesting ones coming down the pike over the next 12 to 16 months that are going to impact payers. If you're doing business in the payer landscape, you should at least be familiar when those things come up. You don't have to be an expert, but you should at least, those are some kind of topics that you should definitely be aware of and be asking more about if they're relevant to the conversations you're having.
Yeah, and I think that's we've whether it's email content, longer form posts, those are types of things we're constantly talking about too. So I would just say follow up with us too if you want to on some of those that Chris mentioned. We're happy to dive a little bit deeper on those. And then along those lines is obviously we're very comfortable talking about this. This is a lot of the work we do and we really enjoy doing and are passionate about it. Probably why we're going to go over time than we planned because this is again something that we're really excited about and as hopefully you should be with what we talked about today. But Chris, can you give us a quick overview of what it would look like from an Untangle side to do an engagement like this? If you are a multi-industry company with some healthcare presence, what would that look like to work with us to really focus in and grow that market?
Yeah, great question. It usually starts with a limited sort of go-to-market type of engagement to evaluate really where your efforts should be focused in the healthcare industry. Again, I would say that the majority of our track record are companies that come to us with a little bit going on in healthcare already, but they know that it's a growth vertical for them where they can be doing so much more. And so it's really wrapping your arms around what type of business are you already doing? Is that the right type of business you should be pursuing? Is there potentially an untapped sort of market or sub-market within healthcare you should be paying attention to as well? but identifying high level what is the right go-to-market strategy for you to make the most gains within the vertical, while also being obviously mindful of the potential runaway costs of overinvesting. And then really quickly for us, we're trying to move through that go-to-market sprint as quick as we can to actually get into revenue accelerating work. And so for some clients, that's new business development. For some clients, that's existing business uplift. For some clients, that's channel development and activation within healthcare. And for some clients, that's actual like inorganic acquisition activity as well. And so I think it really depends client specifically what the right way of proceeding is and where we're going to focus, what mix between new, existing channel and acquisition, and pretty quickly getting into the actual revenue accelerating and opportunity accelerating work as quickly as possible, because nobody wants to get bogged down into a year-long strategy engagement. We want to get right to revenue and performance impact as quickly as we can.
Yeah, thanks for that overview, Chris. And I think as we wrap this up, we always want to leave you with something. We've talked about some of the other pieces, but for you to really internalize and understand the work that we do that Chris just mentioned, we do have a case study that we'll be linking for you here to really read about the work that we've done with a company that was a multi-industry company looking to really grow and accelerate within the healthcare market. We also, if you were at our last show, we did a download form as well that was a prioritization about really setting yourself up for success. Again, this can be applied into the healthcare as you start to prioritize how you're going to enter the market. Or again, it's only February, get moving and leverage this resource. But this is the work we do and really dive in and focus in here. So definitely a good overview for you and hopefully a helpful resource. So give us feedback if there's things we're missing. Feedback today. I want to thank Chris for answering my questions that I had. I want to thank behind the scenes, our tech team as well. And then most importantly, those of you that joined today. We're really thankful. We would love to connect and continue these conversations. This is what we're hearing in the market. I think we're just excited to have these conversations. We're excited about what's coming in the healthcare and market and really looking to bring companies in that are excited to get moving. Chris, any final words? We didn't have time for questions. There's a couple that came through and I'll follow up around partnerships and channels. And then there was another one talking about HCIT buying cycles versus the payers and providers. Please submit other questions and we'll make sure to follow up. But Chris, any last final words before we sign off?
Come find us in Nashville and Las Vegas coming up at Vibe and Hymns. We'd love to speak with you if we're not already.
Great. Thank you all. Have a great day.